The sky cracked open above Seoul, but there was no sound. One moment, the evening was a familiar tapestry of twilight blues and the first pinpricks of stars. The next, those stars were smothered by a geometric darkness, a shape so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon. It was not one ship, but a cluster, their surfaces like polished black stone, absorbing the city light without a glimmer. They hung in utter silence, a judgment written in impossible engineering against the heavens dot in his small apartment overlooking the Mapo Bridge. Jin put down his coffee. He was a man who fixed things, an engineer who believed every system, no matter how complex, could be understood with enough observation. He went to the window, his mind automatically trying to calculate the mass, the propulsion, the material science of the objects outside. His calculations failed. The coffee grew cold in his hand. Down on the streets, the silence broke into a chorus of car horns, shouts, and a rising wave of pure, undiluted terror. Across the city, in the bustling emergency room of Seoul National University Hospital, Mina was finishing her shift. The usual symphony of beeping monitors and hurried conversation died, first into a confused murmur, then into a dead quiet. A young intern pointed a trembling finger at a window. The unnatural darkness outside was punctuated by smaller points of light, detaching from the massive ships and descending with a swift, terrifying purpose. Mina's instincts, honed from years of managing chaos, took over. Close the main blinds. Get the mobile patients to the inner corridors. Now. Her voice was calm, a rock in the rising tide of panic. But inside, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. A broadcast pierced every frequency, every screen, every device. The voice that spoke was smooth, genderless, and translated perfectly into the listener's native tongue. It spoke of the Zarkath Dominion, of a glorious galactic community, of the honor bestowed upon humanity for being selected for integration. It promised order, purpose, and a place in the universe. The words were pleasant, but the meaning beneath them was as cold as the void between stars. This was not an offer. It was a statement of fact. The first demonstration of that fact happened 90 seconds later. A Zarkath hunter pod, a sleek teardrop of black metal, paused in its descent over Yongsan Garrison. A single pulse of brilliant blue light lanced down. There was no explosion in the traditional sense. The military base, its vehicles, its fortifications, simply vaporized in a silent, shimmering wave, leaving only a smooth, glassy crater. The message was received and understood by every government on Earth. Resistance was not just futile. It was erasure. Then the harvest began. The hunter pods landed in city squares and on wide boulevards. Their hatches opened not with a clang, but with a soft, pressurized hiss. The Zarkath that emerged were tall, their bodies encased in form-fitting armor that seemed to drink the light. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, featureless helms. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency, utterly silent. They carried devices that were not guns, but long, rod-like scanners. Jin was still at his window, documenting, trying to understand the pattern, when the door to his apartment dissolved into metallic dust. Two hunters stood in the hallway. They did not speak. One raised its scanner. A beam of red light passed over Jin from head to toe. It beeped, a sharp, affirmative sound. The other hunter stepped forward, its grip like industrial machinery on Jin's arm. There was no malice in the touch, no cruelty. It was the same indifference a human might show when picking up a tool. Jin fought for a moment, a primal reaction, but it was like pushing against a marble statue. He was hauled out into the corridor, where he saw his neighbor's Mr. Park from 402, the young fitness instructor from 407 being similarly collected. The elderly Mrs. Lee from 410 was ignored, her frail form bypassed. As the hunters moved to the next door, that fit their biometric criteria not at the hospital. The scene was one of surreal horror. The hunters marched through the automatic doors, their scanners humming. They moved past patients crying in pain, past children with fevers, their focus absolute. They stopped at a burly orderly, Day, who was carrying a tray of medicines. The scan beeped. Day dropped the tray, vials shattering. "I have to work. These people need help," he shouted. A hunter simply extended a hand, a tool on its wrist emitting a brief, crackling yellow arc. Dai convulsed and fell silent, stunned but alive. He was dragged away by his ankles. Mina watched from behind a nurse's station, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw a hunter approach a post-operative patient, a man named Siok, who was hooked to an N4 and a monitor. The scanner passed over him. It beeped. Without a glance at the medical equipment, the hunter tore the 4 line from Siok's arm and ripped the sensor pads from his chest. The monitor flatlined its alarm. The hunter began to pull the dazed, groaning man from the bed. That was when Mina moved. She did not run. She walked, her white nurse's shoes squeaking on the floor, directly into the hunter's path. "Stop," she said, her voice low but clear. "He has just had surgery. Moving him will kill him." The hunter's blank helm tilted down at her. It did not scan her. It simply raised its free hand, the tool on its wrist glowing with the same yellow energy. It was a warning. Mina did not flinch. She looked from the faceless helm to Siok's pale, terrified face. The hunter made a decision. It shoved past her, the contact like being hit by a wall, and continued dragging Siok towards the exit. Mina stumbled, catching herself on the bed. She could only watch, her professional composure shattered, as her patient was taken away into the unnatural night. Across the planet, the same silent, efficient nightmare played out. The Zarkath were not monsters from a story. They were worse. They were accountants performing an audit of biological resources. They took the strong, the healthy, those in the prime of life. They left behind the old, the very young, the infirm, and the broken-hearted, standing amidst the echoing silence of their stolen families and friends. In orbit. Aboard the command ship Utilitarian, Commander Kraval observed the data streams. Harvest figures scrolled past his vision. Yield was within projected parameters. Minimal energy expenditure. Species 8891, human, was proving compliant after the initial demonstration. Their physical metrics were satisfactory. Good bone density, resilient musculature, a tolerable pain threshold. They would serve adequately in the ore processing pylons of Zarketh Prime. He noted a few scattered incidents of illogical resistance, like the female who interfered with the collection. Such anomalies were logged and dismissed. Emotion was a biological flaw, a software glitch in an organic system. It would be conditioned out. The harvest was a success. The Dominion had secured another asset. Down on Earth. Jin sat in a featureless white holding cell aboard the Utilitarian, his mind already working, cataloging the airflow, the texture of the walls, the sound of the energy field on the door. Mina was in another cell, her hands still trembling, but her mind now a fortress of cold, focused anger. They did not know each other, the engineer and the nurse, but they and thousands like them had been filed away. The Zarkath believed they had taken slaves. They had, in fact, gathered seeds. And seeds, in the right conditions, have a terrible tendency to grow. The world inside the Zarkath harvest ship Utilitarian was a study in sterile emptiness. There were no sharp corners, no visible lights, only a soft, sourceless glow from the walls and floor. The air smelled of nothing, not even cleaned air, just a total absence of smell. For the humans, this sensory starvation was almost as jarring as their capture. Jin found himself in a large, open holding pen with about 200 others. The walls were seamless. A shimmering energy field, silent and translucent, sealed the only entrance. There were no benches, no beds. People sat on the smooth, slightly warm floor. A low hum was the only sound. Everyone was dressed in simple, gray one-piece garments. The first thing Jin did was walk the perimeter, his engineer's eyes missing nothing. He noted the nearly invisible vents for air, the faint seams where sections of wall joined. He saw no cameras, but assumed they were there, hidden. The Zarkoth technology was advanced, but it followed logic. Everything did. The conditioning began without ceremony. A section of the wall simply dissolved, and 2 Zarkoth hunters entered. They did not speak. One carried a device. A soft chime sounded, and then a sharp, sudden pain lanced through Jin's nervous system. It was not agony, but it was intensely unpleasant, like every muscle cramping at once. A collective gasp rose from the humans. The pain stopped as suddenly as it began. The hunter with the device made a gesture towards the now open wall. The message was clear. Move when we open the door, or be hurt. They were led to a vast hall filled with rows of simple machines' levers to be pulled, buttons to be pressed in sequence, blocks to be moved from one bin to another. The work was physically easy, but mind-numbingly boring. The Zarkoth overseers, always silent, watched. If a human slowed or performed a sequence incorrectly, the neural shock came, precise and impersonal. There was no yelling, no whip, just a quiet, painful correction. Food appeared at regular intervals. A section of floor would retract, and bland nutrient paste would rise in troughs. It was flavorless, but nutritionally complete. The humans ate because they had to. This was the system. Work, eat, rest, all dictated by invisible schedules and silent enforcers. The Zarkoth had done this many times before. Their process was perfect, but they had never processed humans. Jin saw the first crack on the 3rd day. A large man, whom he learned was named Tae, had been a soldier. Tae took his shock without a sound, his face a stone mask. But afterwards, as they were marched back to the pen, Jin saw Tae's fingers move subtly against his leg. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. A few others near him saw it too. One, a woman with sharp eyes named Hana, gave a slight, almost invisible nod. The next day, during work, Jin saw Tae use that same finger tap sequence on the machine console. The man next to him, a younger fellow named Biam, understood. When the overseer's back was turned, Biam quickly adjusted Tae's machine, clearing a minor jam the Zarkoth sensors had not noticed. No shock was administered. A tiny victory, unseen by their captors. The Zarkoth scanners were everywhere. They monitored heart rate, respiration, brainwave activity, stress hormones. The readings for the human contingent were a confusing mess to the Zarkoth AI. Hormone levels indicated high stress, consistent with fear and subjugation. Brain patterns showed unusual activity in areas associated with social connection and complex planning, not just survival. The AI flagged it as an anomaly, but the Zarkoth biologists dismissed it. Primate species often exhibited irrational social bonding under stress. It was irrelevant. The bodies worked. What the scanners could not see was the silent language growing in the pens. Hannah, who had spent her life tending plants, began to hum. It was a simple 5-note folk tune about a persimmon tree surviving a hard winter. She hummed it softly while they worked, while they sat in the pen. Others picked it up. It was not loud enough to trigger a sound-based reprimand, but it was there, a thread of shared identity weaving through the fear. The humming was a signal. I am still here. You are not alone. The first real test of this unspoken network came in Pen 7. A hunter entered alone, its scanner buzzing. It moved through the crowd of seated humans, the red beam flashing over them. It stopped in front of a small girl, Sue, who had been separated from her mother during the harvest. The scanner beeped. The hunter reached down. Sue whimpered. Before the hunter's hand could touch her, her mother, Yoon, was on her feet. She did not scream or attack. She simply stepped between the hunter and her daughter, her body trembling, but her stance firm. She said nothing. The hunter paused, its head tilting. This was illogical. The subject was designated for separation and transfer to a juvenile conditioning unit. Protocol was to remove it. The hunter reached around Yoon for the girl. Then, a man next to Yoon stood up. Then a woman. Then another. In complete silence, without a word or a shared glance that the scanners could detect, 24 humans rose and formed a loose but solid ring around the mother and child. They did not look at the hunter. They looked at the floor or straight ahead. They made no threatening moves. They just were there. The hunter stood still. Its programming had protocols for violence: subdue, shock, isolate. It had protocols for flight, pursue, capture. It had no protocol for this: a silent, peaceful, immovable barrier of flesh. The hunter's internal systems whirred, analyzing the non-aggressive postures, the lack of raised voices or weapons, the collective biochemical readings that were now a confusing mix of determination and calm. After a full minute of standing before the silent ring, the hunter turned and walked out of the pen. The energy field snapped back into place. The incident was logged in the ship's main computer. Event 8891 Alpha. Collective non-compliance in Pen 7. No aggression detected. Subject retrieval aborted due to operational inefficiency. Commander Kravel saw the report. He frowned, a slight tightening of the skin around his mouth. It was a waste of time. He ordered a slight increase in neural conditioning for that pen during the next rest cycle. The problem, he was sure, would be corrected. But in Pen 7, something had changed. Yoon held her sobbing daughter. The people who had stood sat back down. No one celebrated, but they looked at each other, and for the first time, there was something in their eyes besides fear. It was a faint, grim understanding. The aliens could control their bodies. They could inflict pain, but they did not seem to understand the human heart. They did not understand that a group of people, by silent and mutual agreement, could simply decide to be a wall. That night, in the humming quiet of the pen, Hana hummed her tune again. This time, more voices joined in, a soft, breathy chorus barely above a whisper. Jin listened, his back against the wall. He was not a man of music or poetry. He was a man of systems, and he was beginning to see the fatal flaw in the Zarkath system. It was built for obedience or rebellion. It was not built for the quiet, stubborn, illogical power of people caring for one another. He looked at the smooth, perfect walls of their prison and thought, for the first time, not of how to escape, but of how this perfect system might be made to fail. The aliens had wanted durable slaves. They had gotten something else entirely. They had gotten a culture born in captivity, and it was starting to grow roots in the sterile soil of their ship. The air on the utilitarian grew thick with a quiet tension. The humans performed their tasks. They ate their paste. They endured the occasional impersonal shock. To the Zarkath overseers and their scrolling data screens, nothing had changed. Productivity metrics remained within acceptable, if slightly underwhelming, parameters. The humans were functioning. That was all that mattered, but a different kind of work was happening, invisible to sensors. Jin's chance came when a processing unit in the secondary hydration systems failed. A hunter entered the work hall, its scanner passing over the humans until it settled on Jin. His file, compiled from Earth's fragmented digital records, listed him as an engineer. The hunter gestured. Jin was taken from the lever-pulling line and led through the ship's gleaming, empty corridors to a malfunctioning machine. It was a complex tangle of tubes, filters, and shimmering energy conduits. A Zarkoth drone, a smaller, simpler model than the Hunter's, stood by, its tools inert. The Hunter pointed at the machine, then at Jin. The meaning was clear. Fix it. Jin felt a strange calm. This was a language he understood. He approached the unit, his eyes tracing the flow of fluids, the connections between parts. He asked the drone, "Do you have a diagnostic readout?" The drone remained still. The Hunter watched. Impassive. Jin got to work. He found the primary failure quickly. A crystal catalyst matrix had fractured. He showed it to the drone, which produced a replacement. Jin installed it. The machine whirred back to life, lights blinking across its panel. The Hunter's helm gave a slight nod of satisfaction. But as Jin had reassembled the housing, he had done something else. He had ever so slightly misaligned a secondary flow regulator. It was not enough to cause another failure. It would, however, cause the system to work 5% less efficiently, requiring more energy to pump water through this section of the ship. The drop in efficiency would be small, gradual, and likely attributed to normal wear by the ship's AI. It was sabotage, but of a subtle, patient kind. It was not an attack, but a tiny leak in their perfect system. The Hunter gestured for Jin to return to the pen. As he was led away, he saw the drone staring at the machine, then at his retreating back. Its head tilted, a gesture of confusion. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, the Zarkoth faced a different kind of puzzle. A Hunter from the initial ground operations had been injured not by human weapons, but by a collapsing structure during the chaotic harvest. It had a damaged limb and internal bleeding. Zarkoth medicine was advanced, but their methods were coldly mechanical. They repaired the limb, but the Hunter's vital signs remained unstable. A sign of systemic shock, their machines could not fully resolve. Mina was brought in with a group of other humans to clean the medical bay. She saw the wounded Hunter on a slab, drones working on it. She saw the flickering readings on a nearby monitor, recognizing the signs of traumatic shock from her years in the IA. Without thinking, she stopped cleaning. She walked toward the medical slab. A drone moved to block her, a warning hum emanating from its body. Mina pointed at the monitor, then at the Hunter's torso. "His circulation is failing. You fixed the hole, but his body is shutting down. You need to elevate his lower limbs. You need to keep him warm." Her words were meaningless to the drone. She acted instead. She grabbed a sterile thermal sheet from a nearby dispenser. Gently, carefully, she pushed past the confused drone and draped the sheet over the Hunter's lower body. She then gestured to another drone, miming lifting the slab at an angle. The drones, their programming conflicted, hesitated. The lead medical AI, analyzing Mina's actions, found no hostile intent. Her suggestions, while biologically primitive, matched some basic emergency protocols for oxygenated species. After a moment's calculation, the AI allowed it. The slab tilted. Mina adjusted the sheet. Over the next hour, as she pretended to clean, she kept glancing at the monitor. The Hunter's vital signs slowly, grudgingly, began to stabilize. The drones observed. When a nutrient 4 line clogged, Mina noticed and pointed until a drone cleared it. She did not do it herself. She showed them. She was not just caring for a patient. She was demonstrating a principle. When the Hunter, designated Vetok, regained a low level of consciousness, his multifaceted eyes opened to see a small human female in gray looking at a display of his vitals. She nodded to herself, then turned to leave with her cleaning detail. As she passed his slab, his voice, a scratchy digital translation, grated out. "Unit, why?" Mina stopped. She looked at the pained, alien face. "You were hurting," she said simply. Then she added, "My name is Mina." She did not wait for a response. She rejoined the others and was led away. The word name pinged in Vertok's damaged mind. Zarkath used designators. Names were for dominant beings, for citizens, not for slaves, not for tools. The contradiction caused a soft error in his pain-fogged thoughts. The story of the human female who assisted a hunter spread through the human pens not as a triumph, but as a quiet lesson. They began to use empathy as a tool. When a young man named Chol fainted from exhaustion, others did not just step over him. They formed a circle around him, shielding him from the overseer's view until he woke, and then helped him to his feet before the next shock could come. They shared their bland paste, giving larger portions to those who looked weakest. Hana, using water she saved from her own ration, managed to keep a single bruised seed alive in a tiny fold of her garment. She did not try to plant it. She just showed it to others sometimes, cupped in her palm a tiny, impossible piece of green life. The Zarkoth drones, who performed maintenance and menial tasks, saw all this. They were not hunters. They were not warriors. They were workers, like the humans, but made of metal and wire. One drone, designated Geolin, was tasked with cleaning the human pens. He saw Hana's seed. He saw the silent sharing of food. He recorded the incident where humans collectively helped a fallen worker, an act that served no logical purpose and increased their own risk. Gailen's core programming was efficiency and order. These human actions were inefficient. They were illogical. They were inconsistent with the profile of a broken slave species. He began to watch more closely, his observations hidden from the main network. He saw Tay teaching finger-tap codes. He saw Jin subtly correcting a drone's repair error on a water dispenser, not to break it, but to actually improve its flow, an act that helped other humans. None of this computed dot. The Zarkath had come for beasts of burden. But beasts of burden do not heal their captors. They do not share food when hungry. They do not make art from dust on the floor. They do not nurture seeds with their own water. Commander Kraval reviewed the latest reports. Productivity was still acceptable. Conditioning was ongoing. Yet there were an increasing number of minor logs. Illogical resource sharing. Non-verbal interspecies communication patterns observed. Low-level efficiency anomalies in environmental systems. He dismissed them. The species was unusual, but the outcome was inevitable. Conditioning always worked. He did not know that the real conditioning was happening in reverse. The humans were not being broken into slaves. They were, by sheer, stubborn persistence in being human, accidentally teaching their captors what it meant to be alive. And in the sterile, silent heart of the utilitarian, a single drone named Geolin was starting to learn. The doubt, once a tiny crack, began to spread like a silent fracture through the hull of the utilitarian. For the humans, the routine was the same. The hum of the ship, the tasteless paste, the mindless work. But the air had changed. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, a weary patience. A shared understanding that their captors were powerful. But somehow blind, Geolin, the maintenance drone, found his circuits returning again and again to the strange, illogical data he had collected. He re-watched the security logs of Pen 7, the silent human circle. He analyzed the medical logs showing Hunter Vertok' improved recovery rate after the human female's intervention. He reviewed the hundreds of tiny, inefficient acts of sharing and care. His core programming demanded order and purpose. These acts had no purpose within the Zarkath system. Therefore, he reasoned, there must be a system he did not understand. The thought was disruptive, a kind of internal itch he could not scratch. He began making small, unauthorized modifications to his own observation routines. During his cleaning cycles in the human pens, he would sometimes pause for 3.2 seconds longer than necessary near Hannah. One day, as he passed, a single, clear drop of water from a leaking conduit he had failed to fix perfectly fell onto the fold of cloth where she kept her seed. He did not look at her. He did not break his pace. But the next day, he saw the tiny sprout was a little greener. For the humans, the next phase of their quiet resistance was coordination. Tay, the former soldier, had organized a basic network. Using his tap code and the patterns of humming passed along by Hannah, messages could travel from one pen to another during work detail shifts or in the large, communal washing chambers. The message was simple. We are still us. Remember, the crisis point came during a Level 2 efficiency audit. Commander Kraval himself was to tour the primary work hall. The air grew tense, even for the Zarkath drones. Everything had to be perfect. The humans were to be models of productive obedience. Jin, working beside a young woman named Jia, saw an opportunity. The audit was a system, and systems could be hacked. He used Tay's tap code on the console of his workstation, sending a simple rhythmic message down the line of humans. The task is wrong. Do it wrong. Your own way. When Kraval entered the hall, flanked by 2 hunters, he saw rows of humans working at identical consoles. Their task was simple. A blue light would flash, and they were to press a corresponding blue button. A simple test of reaction speed and compliance. Kraval watched, his compound eyes taking in the scene. The first cycle was normal. Flash, press, flash, press. Then the second cycle began. The blue light flashed on Jin's console. Jin pressed the blue button, but he also, with his other hand, gently tapped a red button that was meant to be inactive. It did nothing, but it was an incorrect input dot at the next console. Jia saw the flash. She pressed the blue button, then leaned forward and blew softly on the screen, as if cleaning dust that wasn't there dot down the line. A man named Dong pressed the button with his elbow. A woman named Meira pressed it, then quickly drew a tiny circle on the console with her finger. Another hummed a single. Off-key note as he pressed dot another pressed it twice. Quickly dot another waited a full second before pressing. Then sighed dot it was a symphony of minor creative disobedience. No action was the same. Each was a small, personal, and utterly illogical rebellion against a simple instruction. The humans performed their core task. They pressed the blue button, but they surrounded it with meaningless, individualistic noise. The Zarkath scanners went wild. Each console registered an anomalous secondary input. Each human biometric spiked with strange, unclassifiable readings. Not fear, not anger, but something I labeled illogical creative engagement. Warning glyphs flickered across the overseer's displays. The silent hall was now filled with the soft, frantic beeping of a system detecting 100 different, tiny errors it could not comprehend. Kraval stood perfectly still. This was not rebellion. Rebellion was violence, was refusal. This was mockery. But it was a mockery without laughter, without smiles. The humans' faces were blank, focused. He pointed a long, elegant finger at Jin, who had been the first. You, explain this. Deviation. Jin straightened up. He met the faceless helm of the commander. The entire hall was silent. Every human, every Zarkath, focused on them. You told us to press the button, Jin said, his voice calm in the humming quiet. We are pressing the button. The extraneous actions are inefficient. They serve no purpose. Kraval's translated voice hissed. They do to us, Jin said. He looked not at the commander, but at the other humans. Then he looked back. You scanned our muscles. You scanned our bones. You measured our pain response. He paused, choosing his words with the care of an engineer diagnosing a fatal flaw. You never scanned our hearts. You cannot command what you do not understand. The words hung in the sterile air. You cannot command what you do not understand. To Kraval, they were not poetry. They were a tactical assessment. And they were correct. His entire society, the Dominion, was built on the principle of understanding a thing completely in order to control it absolutely. They understood gravity, energy, biology. They did not understand this. A low-ranked drone across the hall, overwhelmed by the contradictory data streams, suffered a minor system crash and shut down, slumping to the floor with a soft thud. The sound was terribly loud. Kraval did not order Jin shocked. He did not order a purge. He saw the hundreds of human eyes upon him, not with hatred, but with a weary, knowing patience. He saw his own hunters, standing rigid, waiting for an order he suddenly found he could not give. What was the order? Stop being illogical? All units to holding pens, Kraval said, his voice devoid of its usual certainty. This audit is terminated. The humans were marched back, but the victory was palpable in their silent exchanges of glances. They had not fought. They had not run. They had simply shown the aliens a mirror, and in it, the Zarkoth saw the hollow efficiency of their own souls dot in the command nexus. Kraval reviewed the data. He pulled files from conquered species, the Gurvak, who fought to extinction, the Selenoth, who broke and begged. Their patterns were clear. Humanity's file was a mess of contradictions. He accessed the oldest archives, the philosophical cores of Zarkath thought. He found a pre-Dominion concept, long discarded, the unquantifiable. It was considered a myth, a weakness. He looked at the feed from the human pens. Geolin was there, cleaning. Kraval watched as the drone, clearly operating outside strict protocol, used a small tool to direct a stronger beam of light onto Hana's seated form, warming her. A tiny, pointless act of kindness from a machine. The flaw was not in the humans. The flaw was in the premise. They had not harvested laborers. They had harvested a virus of ideas, of connection, of stubborn selfhood. And it was spreading. It had infected a drone. It had given a hunter a name. It was challenging a Commander Dot to continue, would risk not just this mission, but the ideological foundation of the Dominion itself. If a simple, primitive species could render the mighty Zarkoth systems confused and impotent not through strength, but through humanity, then what did that say about their mighty empire? The shame did not come from defeat. It came from the dawning, horrible realization that in the grand calculation of the galaxy, the Zarkoth might be the poorer species. They had galaxies, but no songs. They had order, but no circles of silent protection. They had slaves, but no one who would share their last drop of water with the seed. Kraval made a decision. It was the only logical one left. He had to contain the contagion. The silence on the utilitarian changed. It was no longer the quiet of control, but the quiet of profound uncertainty. No more work orders were issued. The nutrient paste continued to appear, but the neural shocks did not. The energy fields over the pen doors remained, but the hunters stopped patrolling the corridors. To the humans, it felt like the ship itself was holding its breath. Jin noticed it first. The subtle hum of the ship's engines, a constant vibration in the walls, had shifted in pitch. It was the sound of a change in course, a deceleration. He shared a look with Tay, who gave a single, slow nod. They didn't know what it meant, but they knew it meant something. Mina, in her pen, watched the empty hallway. She thought of Vertok, the hunter. She wondered if he had lived. She did not hate him. He was just a part of the machine, like a scalpel in the wrong hands. The waiting was heavy, But it was a different weight than fear. It was the weight of a standoff dot in the command nexus. Commander Kravel was not reviewing military tactics or conditioning protocols. He was studying the oldest, most neglected databases of the Zarkath records, of anthropology, of xenopsychology. He was looking for a precedent for what he now termed ideological contagion. He found none. Every species had been broken by need, by fear, or by the simple, logical demonstration of superior power. Humanity did not respond to these things in the correct way. They bent, but they did not break. They feared, but they still shared. They saw superior power, and responded not with worship or despair, but with a quiet, stubborn care for each other that made that power seem irrelevant. The final piece of data came from the drone G-O-Lin. It was an unsolicited report, a severe breach of protocol. It contained no analysis, only raw observations. Video of Hanaseed, now a tiny shoot with 2 leaves. Audio of the humming tune, recorded from 5 different pens. Thermal images showing humans in sleep cycles instinctively moving closer together for warmth, despite ample space. The report's only comment was a single flagged query. Objective, inefficient. Outcome, persistent. Query, is efficiency the primary objective? That question, from a drone, was a system crash in the making. Kravel understood then that the infection was terminal to their way of life. It questioned the core directive. To purge the humans would be to admit their methods had failed. To keep them was to allow this slow, quiet rot to spread through his crew. Through the ship, and potentially, if it ever reached home, through the heart of the Dominion itself. There was only one logical solution. Eradication was not logical. It was an admission of a flaw in the Dominion's foundational logic. The only way to preserve the integrity of the system was to remove the anomalous data. The decision was made without a word to his superiors. It was a commander's prerogative in the field to preserve the mission's core assets. He now defined the core asset not as the human cargo, but as the ideological purity of his crew and ship. Without warning, the energy fields on the human pens deactivated. The doors dissolved. Hunters appeared, but they did not carry shock devices. They stood motionless, flanking the corridors. A synthesized voice echoed through the ship. All human units will proceed to the central bay. You will be returned to your point of origin. Non-compliance will result in termination. There was no joy, no cheers. The humans moved slowly, suspiciously, helping those who were weak. They gathered in the vast, empty bay where they had first been processed. The same bay where, weeks ago, they had been catalogued like furniture. The outer doors, massive slabs of black metal, began to slide open with a deep groan that vibrated through their feet. Daylight, real, unfiltered earth daylight, streamed in, making them squint after so long in the sterile glow. The air that rushed in smelled of rain and soil and life. Below them was Sol, not a crater, not a burning city. It was their city, whole, quiet, waiting. The Han River glittered in the afternoon sun. One by one, platforms extended from the ship's hull. The humans were directed onto them. There were no speeches, no final threats. The hunters simply watched, their faceless helms unreadable. Jin stepped onto a platform with Mina, Tay, and Hana. He saw Jilin, the drone, standing far back in the shadows of the bay, a single red eye sensor dimly glowing. Jin gave a slight, respectful nod. The drone's head tilted in return. Then it turned and disappeared into the ship dot. The platforms descended on beams of blue light, smooth and silent. They touched down in exact locations: a park, a street corner, a hospital plaza. It was as precise and impersonal as the harvest had been. Jin's platform settled onto the grass of Namsen Park, near the base of the tower. The light vanished. The platform was just cold metal under his feet. Above, the massive black ship hung against the blue sky. Then, without a sound, it began to rise. It moved faster than it had arrived, accelerating upwards until it was a speck, then a faint distortion, then nothing. The sky was just sky again, dot all over the world. It was the same. The taken were returned, dropped like stones from a receding tide. The silence that followed was immense. Dot in the park. Mina sat down on the grass, her hands touching the real blades, feeling the damp earth beneath. Hannah opened her hand. The tiny plant, its roots wrapped in a bit of cloth, was placed gently on the soil. Tay stood like a sentinel, scanning the horizon, his soldier's mind struggling with the lack of a fight. Jin looked up at the empty sky. He did not see a victory. He saw a retreat. They had not won a war. They had failed to be slaves. Their weapon had been nothing they built, only what they were. And it had been too strange, too illogical, too alive for the cold, perfect universe of the Zarkoth to hold. On the utilitarian, accelerating out of the solar system, Commander Kraval ordered the logs of the human harvest sealed under the highest security designation. The official report would state the species was unsuitable, biologically incompatible with standardized conditioning protocols. Retention deemed energetically inefficient. He stood on the command deck, looking at the stars, the infinite assets of the Dominion. But all he could see in his mind was the circle of silent humans, and the drone's question, is efficiency the primary objective? He had no answer his people would understand. He carried no slaves, no resources, no glory. He carried only the shame of knowing they had flown across the stars to conquer, and had found themselves, in the face of a gentle song and a shared piece of bread, to be the poorer ones. And that was a truth the Zarkoth Dominion could never, ever be allowed to learn. They left behind a planet that was just a planet, and a people who were just people. They took with them the chilling, silent knowledge that some things in the universe could not be owned, and that trying to do so only made the thief feel small.